ICAO Annexes, Short Summary. By Magid Saeed Al-Hadabi, January 19, 2021. We always hear about ICAO Annexes, but many of us did not know the names of ICAO Annexes, and what the purpose of each one. The fact is that I am not having any idea about the most of ICAO Annexes, and that's why I am writing about it in this article. Before we go in deep in explanation of ICAO Annexes, I will give you short introduction about ICAO. The International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, is a United Nations, UN, specialized agency, established in 1944 to manage the administration and governance of the Convention on International Civil Aviation, Chicago Convention. ICAO works with approximately 191 member states and industry organizations to reach consensus on international civil aviation standards and recommended practices, SARPs, and policies in support safe, efficient, secure, economically sustainable and environmentally responsible civil aviation sector, ICAO, ND, Para. 1. These SARPs, annexes, and policies ensure member states' local aviation operations conform to global norms, which in turn supports safe and efficient global air transportation. Let us go back to December 7, 1944. The Convention on International Civil Aviation was established in Chicago by 52 signatory states, known as Chicago Convention. Chicago Convention document was including 90 articles. The Article 54 highlight the adoption of standards and recommended practices, SARPs, for convenience and designate them as annexes to Chicago Convention and notifying all contracting states. In Article 12, it is mentioned that each state shall keep its own rules of the air as uniform as possible with those established under the Convention. The duty to ensure compliance with these rules rests with the contracting state. What is ICAO Annex? ICAO Annex mean an extra or subordinate part to Chicago Convention document, the Convention on the International Civil Aviation. What is the purpose of ICAO Annex? It contains the globally agreed standards and recommended practices, SARPs, of the International Civil Aviation. As required by Chicago Convention Document Chapter 6, Article 37, ICAO will adopt technical specifications on international civil aviation in order to achieve the highest practicable degree of uniformity in regulations, standards, procedures and organization. This mean the standards and recommended practices, SARPs, of ICAO are technical specifications, regulations, standards, procedures and organization. Perfect, you got the short introduction about ICAO Annexes. Let us move to the short summary about each ICAO Annex. Before you read this summary, may I ask you what is the name of the ICAO Annex 15? Sure. Short summary about ICAO Annexes. ICAO Annex 1. Personnel licensing. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, for the licensing of the following: flight crew members, pilots, flight engineers and flight navigators, maintenance technicians, flight dispatchers, air traffic controllers, aeronautical station operators. ICAO Annex 2, Rules of the Air. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, related to general air rules, visual flight rules and instrument flight rules. The pilot in command of an aircraft is responsible for compliance with the rules of the air. ICAO Annex 3, Meteorological Service for International Air Navigation. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, related to providing necessary meteorological information to operators, flight crew members, air traffic services units, search and rescue units, airport management and others concerned with aviation. ICAO Annex 4, Aeronautical Charts. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, related to producing aeronautical charts, which used by most segments of aviation as a reference to them for planning, air traffic control and navigation purposes. ICAO Annex 5, Units of Measurement to be used in air and ground operations. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, related to standard units of measurements to cover all aspects of air and ground operations. ICAO Annex 6, Operation of Aircraft, Parts 1, 2 and 3. Part I, International Commercial Air Transport, Aeroplanes. Part 2, International General Aviation, Aeroplanes. Part 3, International Operations, Helicopters. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, which provide one international set of operational rules and regulations for the wide variety of aircraft. In addition, operating minima based on the environmental factors found at each aerodrome. ICAO Annex 7, Aircraft Nationality and Registration Marks. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, for registration of the aircraft and the use of letters, numbers and other graphic symbols to be used in the nationality and registration marks of aircrafts. For example 70 Yemen. ICAO Annex 8, Airworthiness of Aircraft. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, related to aircraft design, construction and operation, which must be in compliance with the appropriate airworthiness requirements of the state of registry of the aircraft. Full compliance, the aircraft will be issued with a certificate of airworthiness declaring that the aircraft is fit to fly. ICAO Annex 9, Facilitation. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, related to providing a frame of reference for planners and managers of international airport operations to simplify the procedures required to clear aircraft, passengers and cargo. ICAO Annex 10, Aeronautical Telecommunications, Volumes 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Annex 10 is divided into 5 volumes. Volume I, Radio Navigation Aids. Volume 2, Communications Procedures including those with band status. Volume 3, Communication Systems. Part 1, Digital Data Communication Systems. Part 2, Voice Communication Systems. Volume 4, Surveillance Radar and Collision Avoidance Systems. Volume 5, Aeronautical Radio Frequency Spectrum Utilization. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, related to most complex and essential elements of international civil aviation, aeronautical communications, navigation and surveillance. ICAO Annex 11, Air Traffic Services. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, related to how to prevent collisions between aircrafts, whether taxiing on the maneuvering area, taking off, landing, en route or in the holding pattern at the destination aerodrome. ICAO Annex 12, Search and Rescue. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, related to locating and rescuing survivors of aircraft accidents. ICAO Annex 13, Aircraft Accident and Incident Investigation. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, related to investigation of an aircraft accident or serious incident. ICAO Annex 14, Aerodromes, Volumes 1 and 2. Volume 1, Aerodrome Design and Operations. This annex contains standards and recommended practices, specifications, that prescribe the physical characteristics and obstacle limitation surfaces to be provided for at aerodromes, and certain facilities and technical services normally provided at an aerodrome. It also contains specifications dealing with obstacles outside those limitation surfaces. It is not intended that these specifications limit or regulate the operation of an aircraft. Volume 2, Heliports. Annex 14, Volume 2, contains standards and recommended practices, specifications, that prescribe the physical characteristics and obstacle limitation surfaces to be provided for at heliports, and certain facilities, and technical services normally provided at a heliport. It is not intended that these specifications limit or regulate the operation of an aircraft. ICAO Annex 15, Aeronautical Information Services. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, on how an aeronautical information service shall receive and/or originate, collate or assemble, edit, format, publish/store and distribute specified aeronautical information/data. ICAO Annex 16, Environmental Protection Volumes I, 2, 3, and 4. Volume 1, Aircraft Noise. Volume 2, Aircraft Engine Emissions. Volume 3, Aeroplane CO2 Emissions. Volume 4, Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation, CORSIA. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, on protection of the environment from the effect of aircraft noise, aircraft engine emissions, etc. ICAO Annex 17, Security Safeguarding International Civil Aviation Against Acts of Unlawful Interference. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, and technical measures for the protection of the security of international air transport. ICAO Annex 18, The Safe Transport of Dangerous Goods by Air. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, related to the safe transporting and handling of dangerous goods. ICAO Annex 19, Safety Management. It contains standards and recommended practices, SARPs, on safety management functions related to, or in direct support of, the safe operation of aircraft and airports. Also, State Safety Program, SSP. I hope that I have clarified the ICAO annexes in a professional, concise way. Please share this article for the benefit of your colleagues.
AviationProfessional.net, a home of aviation articles.